international affairs, okay? So that's why head of state, okay? All right, excellent work. Let me exit out of here. Take a look at your primary versus secondary handout. So it's actually the one that has the objectives on it. Just flip it over. And you'll see that your sheet says primary versus secondary sources. So it's set up in columns. So everything on the left defines and gives examples for primary, everything on the right for secondary. Okay, so really, just skip down to the examples for a minute. Take a minute to just skim over some of those examples so then we can talk about the definitions. Okay, so again, primary versus secondary, skimming over some examples. You've got 30 more seconds to solidify a few examples in your brain. Now that we've had a chance, just a preview, I hope some of this is already starting to sound familiar, like, okay. When you think about all the pictures Ms. Pettit has shown you, would you classify them as primary or secondary? Okay, take a minute to think about that. So again, would you classify all those pictures Ms. Pettit has been showing you as primary or secondary? Who's number 5? Who's number 5? Number 5? Okay. What would you say? Are the pictures that she's been showing you primary or secondary?
Primary?
Yeah, and I think that most of them have been Obama, right? With his presidency. And so they have been current. I think sometimes the one that stands out to me, when you're looking at some primary versus secondary, the newspaper articles, okay? Sometimes you may actually have a newspaper article, it was the sinking of the Titanic, and the newspaper came out in 1912, okay? The sinking of the Titanic happened in 1912. If somebody is there, okay, they witness something. So you go to a concert, you are a primary source. If you tell somebody you went to a concert, you tell them the great story about it, they could be a secondary source if they go tell other people. So maybe they write a letter about it, they are blogging, that kind of thing. If you are blogging about it, that's a primary source. Okay? Now some primary sources are better than others, so we're not really looking at quality today, but getting a sense of a couple of primary versus secondary examples. Okay, now I want you to give me an example of a primary source based on your reading. Okay, a primary source. Number 4. Who's number 4? Yep. Francis, what's an example of a primary source?
Primary source is, for example, editorial in the newspaper.
Good. So they actually experienced it and they write the editorial about it. Okay, that's a good example. Now I want an example of secondary. Based on your reading, what's an example of secondary? Number, oh, we don't have to, is there a number 32 in here? We don't have that many students in here. Number 11. Who's lucky number 11? All right, what's an example of secondary? Anything that you read from the sheet.
A textbook.
Good. Okay. So textbook. So what you have been reading for NSL. Okay, the red textbooks in the back there. Those are examples of secondary sources. Okay, they weren't at those events, but they're writing. They have the benefit of looking back with hindsight, adding information. Okay? So when we're looking at primary sources, they are original materials. Okay? Secondary, they are removed from original materials. And oftentimes are analyzing primary materials, but they are not the primary materials themselves. Okay? All right, let's take a look at your chart. Oops, I have the highlighter on. Okay? Grab a chart. Go ahead and put your name on the top. Okay, you will need a writing utensil for this part. Is there anybody that does not have a writing utensil? Yeah, you just make sure you put it back in the box. That would be great. Okay, everyone has a writing utensil? Anyone not have one? Okay. So on the chart, what you're going to do, is this the old chart? That is the old chart. Okay, so I'm not going to show one up here. You have your chart, and it has 3 rows. You actually only need to do 2 of the 3. Thank you. Okay, you only need to do 2 of the 3. Okay. I have given you an example of what I want you to do based on our warm-up. So let's take a look at the columns that you need to fill in. Okay? The first one is the presidential role. If you look back at the top, I gave you a list of them just so you could remember. But also, if you look up on the wall, everyone see, there are 2 up front and 4 on the side here. That's all of the roles listed as well. Okay? So you want to put down the name of the role, and then the presidential action. So in the case of our warm-up, it was the president making a Memorial Day speech. Okay? For you, it may be a picture of George Bush signing the Patriot Act. Okay? You may use a picture. You don't have to use a whole book. Okay? You want to find something in the book you can use. Okay? So presidential action that you're choosing. The source. Write the title. So if it's a news article, you can write the title of the news article. If it's the book, you can write the title of the whole book. Okay? And then I want you to infer whether or not it's primary or secondary. So do you think it is the original content from the time, or is it somebody's interpretation? Okay? If it's primary, it's the original. Secondary is the interpretation. Okay? So you only have to do 2 more. If your group is moving and you have plenty of examples you can pull, feel free to add on a 3rd. Okay? Sometimes you like to challenge yourself and you don't like to make space on a chart. Go ahead, there's plenty of space. But I want you to do this in about 10 minutes. Okay? I want you to work as a group. So what that might look like. Okay, if I was in this group, you guys have like 6 million books. Some groups have more papers, some groups have more books. I'd probably pass a book out to each person. Okay? Everyone has a book that includes the Constitution. So if you're trying to remember what the president's powers are, you could use that. Another tool you're going to be able to use here in just a minute, your notes sheet from yesterday. Okay? And the day before you took those notes on your chart. So if you need to remember, okay, which role of the president is that? Use the notes, because what you do in class, it matters, okay? You taking those notes from Ms. Pettit, you can use that today. So you can use your notes, use the book, use the Constitution. There are a couple of strategies I'd recommend. You want to use the text features. You're not reading the book. I'm giving you 10 minutes and I gave you like 7 books. So pull out the contents of the envelopes, pass them out. Pull and pass around the books. And try and figure out, is there something in the book I could use? You can use the title to figure out, okay, what topic is this going to address? You can use the table of contents. That's located in the very front, and it tells you where to go for each topic. If you already have something in your head, like, ooh, okay, I'm a real World War II buff, I know a lot of this stuff, I'm going to go to the index in the back and see exactly what page they talk about that exact thing. Okay, so the index in the back is more detailed. You can just flip through until you see a picture. Or take a look at this one. Just look at my example. This is literally me just kind of flipping through. A lot of times if a teacher asks you to read your textbook, you skip over anything that looks like this. You never read those, right? You're like, oh good, free page. I can keep going. And I would actually encourage you for this though, this is the one part you do want to read. Anything that is shaded or looks like a primary document, this may be a good example of what to use and what to interpret. So none of the resources you're reading in full, even the little papers inside the envelope, you have to kind of pull and think about examples. So you're really having to think critically, apply. The other strategy I would use, not just text features, but I would also maybe talk within your group, what are some possible roles we can look for? Okay, so if I am looking at like World War II or like on the September 11th National Security Group, I might be thinking, okay, what are sort of presidential war powers? I might be thinking like diplomacy. I may be thinking along certain roles already, okay? Whereas with some other ones, like with immigration, maybe I'm looking at his process in lawmaking in terms of chief legislator. So I would brainstorm, have about a 30-second conversation of what are we expecting? What are we going to try and find? And you're working together. Now, you can all have the same answer. You can all have different answers. That part's not going to matter because there are 3 million answers you can have. Okay? How many rows in the chart do you need to fill in? 2 rows. Okay, so you can aim for 3. You have to do 2. Okay? I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to work, and we'll be cycling around answering any questions. Okay? All right. I'll put the time up on the board. Do you guys have the clock one? Keep us on schedule. Who had internment camps? Some of the books may actually be called like primary resources, so that'll at least help you answer part of the chart. Like for this one's called Historic Documents on the Presidency. So if it's a historic document, do you think it's primary or secondary? So you already have the answer to part of like a third of your chart. So I would probably use this one because I know it's going to lead you to a couple of examples. That one is probably secondary unless it's only the Constitution in there. So, but if you directly cite the Constitution itself is primary. So that's secondary. So, Obama, President, Turkey, the most Facebook thing. So, when did this article take place? So, is that current or is it older? Yeah, so I feel like that would go farther on the time. And plus you have like a real picture. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Use that as one of your sources. Again, you're going to talk within your group. You don't want to just work independently.
The pictures would be primary.
Share some thoughts. Ask them some questions.
Hey, look. Yeah, it's right.
That's okay. Like I said, we're not going to